All right, I think we're ready to go. Welcome back to another episode of Composites Weekly. Today, I have on special guest joining me today, Brandon Cornuke. Do I have that right, Cornuke?
You got it. Good job.
All right, very good. I should have asked before. He is the author of a great book, The Value Proposition Matrix. We're going to be discussing on this episode 4 questions that drive innovation success. I had the opportunity recently to go through this book, invited Brandon on. I thought this would be a great discussion for our industry, Brandon. I'm happy to have you on. Uh, just to give our listeners kind of a little background on the book. You just published this last year, so I think it's pretty timely coming out of COVID. I don't know if you planned that was that was obviously not planned or planned. You didn't plan COVID, but anyway, just to give our listeners a little overview of the book, the value proposition matrix explains how to use these 4 questions, to sharpen any business idea, to be whether it be a new product, service, whether it be a new business launch, startup companies. I think a lot of startup companies could benefit from this read, but so many companies in our industry, Brandon, we just had a previous podcast discussion earlier this morning before you came on and it got into, we went pretty long on it, but it was actually a really good debate about our industry, the composites industry, and really getting into markets like the EV markets nowadays, and how do you not only show up or present yourself to these industries, these new innovations, but also how do you present the value? And I thought about your book as we were having this discussion, and told my guest on that episode, I said, I almost wish you had been able to join us, because you would have been able to provide some really good insight, from your work. But great book. It is a tool set for any early stage innovator who wants to sharpen their value proposition and focus their efforts wisely. So Brandon, thanks so much for spending some time with me today, and appreciate your time.
Happy to be here. Love finding ways to help innovators and folks who are helping innovators.
Yeah. So before we jump into the book, I want to get some background on yourself, because I was reading the book. I found it kind of interesting, your story in a nutshell, going through your your MBA about the time of the last, what they call the last Great Recession, or the
That's right.
last financial collapse that we had. But I'm going to let you kind of tell the story of your journey, coming out with an MBA and really starting your first venture, and some of the things that you've learned along the way that you've put into this book, and some of the case studies and examples that you've learned from in researching this book.
Yeah, I'm happy to take you through that journey. As you mentioned, I did have front row seats to the financial world.
Yeah.
And so previous to business school, I was a consultant, doing a lot of information technology consulting. Decided to go back and get my MBA. And while I was there, started a business with with one of my fellow students, who became a very good friend. And we were looking at starting something because the job market was really scary. We actually were really excited about of entrepreneurship generally, but we were looking for a problem to solve. And we were wandering around our worlds, kind of imagining these various problems, and landed on kind of a funny one. We actually found that some friends of ours use dump-on body powders. These are Gold Blonde or baby powder or whatever, to stay cool and dry when they were exercising or working out. Some folks out there might, or some of your listeners might know what I'm talking about.
Sure.
Realize that when you dumped it on your skin, it worked really well, but it got everywhere. It was really messy. And every other personal care product on your bathroom shelf has been innovated in some kind of way, from a packaging perspective over the last several decades, except body powder, and we couldn't figure out why. So we started to look into it and realized we could put it into an aerosol form. We hired a chemist. We put together some manufacturing, and developed the first aerosol body powder. You could spray it on your skin; it would stay there and dry and really quickly, and it was really effective, and it was pretty clean. Launched it, and about 18 months later, and a company that owns Gold Bond called Chatham launched
Right.
an aerosol body powder for the first time in 100 years, right? So clearly they were good for them for fast following. Their brand name and their retail distribution made it really hard for us to compete.
Yeah.
And so
Right.
we carved out a little niche, but nothing that was really at scale. But what I saw in that innovation journey was this need to be able to tell our story as we were going around telling our story to retailers and folks who investors, our manufacturing partners. It was hard to get quickly and succinctly to the core of our value, and that kind of stuck with me. And over the years, as I went around, I did a bunch of corporate innovation roles. I ran some businesses, one at Target corporate, one later at a company called American Greetings. It was in Cleveland, which is where I live now. Um, these I found this persistence in terms of folks explaining their idea, this innovation sort of early stage point of view, was really hard. And
Mhm.
I eventually became an adjunct professor of design and innovation at the Weatherhead School of Management, which is at Case Western University, which is here in
Right.
Cleveland, and saw the same pattern with my students. Is you'd ask an innovator, somebody who had an idea, hey, tell me about your idea, and they struggled to get there succinctly.
Sure.
So even with all the tools that are available to us, things like a business model canvas or a business plan or any of these other sort of traditional mechanisms of describing
Right.
value, it still was very hard. So that was really the starting point for me putting together a tool set based on the foundational elements of value. And those are the four questions that you mentioned.
Yeah. So let's get into those four questions, because you expand on those in the book. And, I'll go ahead and mention those. Who is your customer? What is the problem that you're solving? What is your unique solution? And uh, let's see, lastly, what is the driver? What is you mentioned distribution earlier? What is your system for putting that in motion? Right. Because you can have those first three lined up perfectly, which I see a lot of times happen. Everybody gets, hey, I know who my customer is. I know what the problem is that I'm solving. I know that, what's unique, my USP and all of that. So you got all those lined up, but then you don't have I think about I don't know if you ever watched the show Breaking Bad, but they had they always had the great, they had the best product out there, but it was always like distribution. That's our problem,
Yeah, yeah,
distribution. So,
that's a great example. I love that. Yeah, yeah,
so let's dig into those. Starting with the customer, because most people think you use some really good examples in the book. And I love the one because I love golf, and I love the one about the story regarding the golf coating.
yeah.
And maybe you could get into a little bit of that. But most people think they know their customer. Sometimes they don't. Sometimes they don't know their target market as well as they think they know.
That's exactly right. That's exactly right. And so you mentioned so who's your customer?
Right.
Crucial question, and I recommend just starting there.
Yeah.
Ultimately, but you really have to understand the mindset of the person that you're trying to serve. And
Yeah.
when I say person, I truly mean like not just who's your customer, but who's your first customer. When you're in an early stage value proposition discovery exercise, you
Mhm.
want to be able to get really, really clear about that that person with a name and a face and a job
Right.
who you can inhabit and you can really get into their head. Because ultimately, when you're starting something new, whether you're inside a company or outside of one, you got to get somebody's attention. And the
Sure.
people's attention that you want to get are those kind of early adopters, the people who aren't just wandering around the ether wondering if there's something cool, but actively seeking a solution to the problem that they're dealing
Mhm.
with every day.
Yeah.
So that it's the motivation that you really want to find inside someone's head. And so if you can get really sharp about who that is, you're going to be in a really good place to start defining your
Yeah.
value. Now you'll find that people have a hard time saying who their first customer is specifically, or any customer generally. And partly that's because there's this fear that if you limit the number of people who are going to want your thing, that it's going to limit your market size, right? It's going to everybody's going to want this product. It's ultimately going to solve everybody's problem. Well, that's a really tempting path to take, but it's kind of a recipe for ruin, especially in the early version of a startup, because you want to get specific. I talk a little bit in the book about an example of the largest company in the world, Apple, actually, and how folks will say to me, Apple doesn't have a first customer. Their customer is everybody. What are you talking about? I've got an iPhone right here. It's who's it not for? And I love to say you're absolutely right. And they have earned the right to launch products that are functionally for everybody. But when Steve Jobs and Steve Wozniak started, they were building computers for an extremely narrow niche. People who wanted computers in their homes. At the time, in the early 80s, nobody wanted a computer in their home. Nobody knew that was the thing. Businesses wanted computers, and they were these enormous things that sat in these buildings and did really complex jobs. Apple knew at the earliest stages that they needed to find highly motivated, targeted customer groups, and that's where they started, and they've built into what they are today. But that's why we recommend all start there.
It's kind of interesting you bring up Steve Jobs, because we were having a discussion earlier on a previous podcast this morning, and we talked about Steve Jobs. He was kind of one of those a unique innovator where, I remember him saying in interviews, most consumers don't know what they want. And that defies a little bit of what we talk about is doing your market research. But, he said, well, most people, when he first developed they come up with the iPod originally, no one could envision 1,000 songs in your pocket, but no one was making that, or no one was saying, I want 1,000 songs in my pocket, but he knew what people really wanted. Ultimately he just did. I think that his point is most people don't know how to put that into, tell you without really digging deep. And what you talk about in the book is asking the right questions and really kind of going deeper to understand what your market, just assuming off the top of the bat because of certain trends. That's not market research, but really digging deep and asking the right questions is really understanding. Your customer or your customer market or your customer base may not be able to put it into words, but it does give you the kind of feedback that you need to really go from there.
That's exactly right. It actually will get us to the second piece of the model, which is problem. I'd say, there's a quote out there that I see routinely shared. It's the Henry Ford quote, right? Which is, if I had asked customers what they wanted, they'd have told me faster horses, right? And so that's what people tell me. Like, why am I going to talk to customers? They don't know what they want. Well, the truth is, if Henry Ford had asked customers not about what they wanted, but about the problems they had with their current solution, he would have found that horses die, they poop, they're ornery, and they're tough to deal with, right? They're all the things that a car solved. And so ultimately you can move from this deep understanding of the customer to their needs, to problems underneath them. Don't ask them, if you're going out there and doing customer discovery, customer research, like, hey, what do you want?
Yeah.
Tell me about the last time you used the product in your specific category. And how did it go? Like, what was good about it? What was bad about it? If you're developing a product right now, and this applies, this is not just a consumer product, by the way. I mean, I realize a lot of folks might think, hey, we're just talking about consumer product. This is in B2B. I do the vast majority of my work in B2B or sort of outside of consumer work. I've done work in everything from art institutions to Major League Baseball teams. Okay. These concepts apply across the board. You have folks who have problems, and these problems come in all sorts of shapes and sizes. And once you understand them and the kinds of problems they're dealing with, the pains that they're feeling, that combination allows this really powerful alchemy of, okay, now let's solve that. Now let's describe, using a list of their problems, knowing who they are and exactly what their need state is. and saying, hey, this is the list of things that I'm able to do for you in a unique way, right? So, and
Right.
that gets to the solution. So that's the nice, neat, if you understand your customer, you
Right.
dig into their pain points, not, hey, what do you want next, but what's wrong with your horse, right?
Sure.
Okay,
Yeah.
what, you want a solution? Here are all the elements of that I can give you, right? It won't bite you, it won't poop. All you do is put fuel in it and you get it on the road, and it's gonna take you faster and farther than you ever could thought possible.
Yeah.
So that's the combination of those three components that really start to make a value proposition work.
Yeah, I love the story you shared about the company, the guys that created the performance indicators, where they create the coding for the golf ball. And so the whole purpose was you design a specific coating. So, if a ball's been underwater for a period of time, it changes color. So there you indicate it's lost some of the performance capabilities in the ball, and no one wants that. It's amazing how many golfers, it's like pick up used golf balls, when they're playing, and
Yeah.
how often they're using those instead of brand new ones. And so I want you to share that. You tell the story, because I think that's a great example of what you're describing, in the lack of, or first of all, finding the right target customer, and then understanding what they really need and want.
You bet. This is it's a great example. This
Yeah.
product, I'm a golfer too, and it's super interesting. Right, as you said, we all know that if you've been around a golf course, golf balls at all, you know that there's sometimes a lot of water on them, and when balls go in the water, depending on how long they've been in there, they can be compromised.
Right.
So a couple of guys said, you know what, that's a problem that we can solve. So they went out, and the first thing they did was just try to solve the problem. They said, first of all, they thought any golfer is going to want this problem. We have this problem. We don't want to use golf balls that have been compromised by water. So let's use our chemistry background, and let's develop a coating that turns gray the longer it's been in water. So if you pull out a ball and you say, boy, it's got what's called performance indicator on it, it's turned gray. It gives me the knowledge that I need to toss that ball back in the water in the trash can and say, you know what, I'm going to use a better ball.
Right.
Great. Who's not going to want that? So they go out, they develop all the chemistry, they put it on the balls, they talk to the big companies about this, and nobody wants
it. And what was the reason?
Well, why not? Like, we're all out there.
Right.
Why not? This is going to change everything.
Sure.
Well, think about who's buying golf balls and who's using whose problem you're actually solving, right?
That's right.
Are you solving the problem of the people who are paying retail for their golf balls?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
No, you're solving the problem for the person that gets to pluck it out of the water after I've put it in there, which I do often. Right. And so and when you add performance indicator to a golf ball, and anybody who's listening to your podcast knows that you're going to have to add cost, right? There's a cost element to adding a component or a feature. So now you're going to say, okay, I'm going to pay a couple bucks more for a dozen balls to have the next guy know if it's been put in the water.
Exactly. What's the value to me? It's not me that I'm providing the value to.
What's the value to me, right? And ultimately, then what is the value to the company who's going to incorporate it into its product? And therefore, the product sputtered. It failed. Now the question is, okay, great, Brandon. Now you're telling me how something doesn't work, but how can we have used these concepts to fix this problem? Had we been working together, had I been working with the performance indicator team, the question would have been, all right, let's talk about this first customer and what problem you're actually solving. Turns out we would have done that analysis and said, look, these companies aren't going to pay for this because there's a mismatch between the problem you're solving and the solution. But what if instead you asked, who really does care about waterlogged balls and who is willing to pay for them in order to know that? Well, maybe it's driving ranges. Maybe it's anybody who wants repeat ball use, who might have balls sitting out in a range in puddles of water for an extended period of time and need to know whether a ball that's in their pile of used over and over golf balls needs to be tossed.
Absolutely.
But suddenly you can go to a company and say, hey, how many thousands of driving ranges out there? How many thousands of balls do they use every year? What if you add this and it's a specific coating for a driving range ball? Does that solve your problem? Now, will people buy that? Don't know. You'd have to experiment with that. But at least you have a reasonable thesis versus a glaring mismatch in terms of the problem statement of the customer.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, that's a great point. You know, you talk about the driving ranges, companies that sell these repurposed balls or these used balls back to places like, you know, the big chains. You go and buy a bucket of those big used balls. You know, it's like, you know, you get
Right.
a combination of different ones in there, but for the most part, you know, being able to qualify, you know, those balls that, you know, obviously that you're selling is an added value to that because they know what they're getting. But you're right. Those are things you got to test, but you're definitely off target, you know, selling straight to the direct consumer, you know, when you're pitching that, because it's like, okay, what are my extra dollars going for the next guy, you know? So
I already spent enough money on the next guy's ball. I'll tell you that.
oh man. So I want to get into, you know, because we're running short on time, but let's get into the delivery, but because I think that's where distribution or you know, capabilities. I mean, because we could talk about products or we could talk about services, but you definitely have to have the infrastructure in place, you know, and that's oftentimes something that is under tested, not well thought out, oftentimes in startups. And if you could maybe spend some time on that and give us some examples.
You bet. So as we're talking about the customer and the problem, and as you're mentioning, this fourth piece of this puzzle has got to be about what I shorthand call your team.
Sure.
But it really is, as you described. I like how you described it. It's your capabilities. It's your
Right.
asset. It's your infrastructure.
Mhm.
It's the answer to the question, why you?
Yeah.
Now, innovators and startups hate it when I ask this question. First of all, it's very rude and abrupt. Like, what do you mean,
Yeah.
why me? It's my
Right.
idea. Well, the truth is, the idea is the only thing that I would not list among your assets, because I hate to break it to most innovators out there, but probably not the first person to have thought about a
Right.
solution to a problem. It's just very rare to find anything new under the
Mhm.
sun, right? But what is unique and what does create value and what does launch successful businesses is someone who has the right assets, and including it can be funding, it can be experience, it can be skill set, it can be intellectual property, it can be infrastructure,
Yeah.
established supply chains, customer relationships, retail relationships. There are just myriad examples of assets and combination of assets. Network, for God's sake, like who you
Mhm.
know.
Right.
All these things in unique combination make or put someone or a team of people into a good position to
Mhm.
deliver
Mhm.
on the value. And so if
Sure.
you understand how all those things fit together, I mean, even in the performance indicator example, we can say, look, these guys were top tier chemists. They had relationships with manufacturing. That wasn't the short circuit part of their value, but at least they had a really good understanding of why.
Right.
Now, when I ask this, it's just really important because most models out there, even the business model canvas, if you're familiar with that one, does not
Mhm.
contemplate why you. It contemplates a number of elements that are in a business, assuming that you can just assemble the resources you need. Because this is kind of the world we live in, right? We think, oh, I've got LinkedIn, I've got Google, I can just find someone who can code in Python or someone
Right.
who understands polymers. I mean, no, turns out go try and see how that works. It's hard. It's hard, right? So
Right.
if you've got a team, if you've got the assets, then you can start to say, okay, let's look at this in combination.
Yeah.
If you want to tell your value story, let me just tell you that this is a really nice order to tell it in. You can say, okay, we know that there's a problem. Okay. And you know who feels this problem the most? It's this specific customer. Maybe it's you, Mr.
Mhm.
Customer. We have a unique set of solutions or solution that will address your problem, and we can deliver it because we have X, Y, Z. Done.
Sure. Yeah.
Okay. If you've got those four elements and you pitch it that way, that's all you need. If you need an elevator pitch, or if you ever stuck in a place where somebody's like, hey, tell me about your thing, just go there. This problem, this customer feels it the most. Here's my unique solution. Here's why I'm in a good place to deliver it. And you're all set.
Yeah. That's great. I want to bring up one other topic before we wrap up. People that are in, if you're selling, it's difficult if you're selling a commodity or what's perceived as a commodity. Um, and you bring up some examples like, so anybody that's selling another version of, how do you how do you talk to those companies out there? They're selling just another product out there. And that probably, obviously that goes into the solution stage and the problem stage. So you've got to carve out something. And you talk about, you mentioned examples in your book, Dollar Shave company, razors. I mean, there's a million razors out there,
Wow.
so what was their unique value that they were able to create in the problem and the solution, and then I guess ultimately the distribution. That was the part where, obviously they got into all the major, I mean, you can't go to a Walmart or a Target without seeing Dollar Shave Club. So obviously, but it had to start somewhere. They didn't start there.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, and that's a great example of commodity. And
Yeah.
folks out there, especially in a B2B world, we feel like, so much is commodity. So much pressure is put on us to lower
Right.
cost, to just
Mhm.
get that next thing. And if you've got that person who's sitting right behind you, ready to deliver that product, boy,
Sure.
they're gonna replace you. And the truth is, what everything you're describing around how to differentiate can be seen through the lens of lots of other things other than cost. And these are channels, strategy, and relationships, and reliability. And those are the things that actually, if you think about it, solve the customer's problem, that are orders of magnitude more important than just cost. And I don't mean that you don't have to compete on cost. That's
Right.
certainly an important element in any business decision. But at the end of the day, I've run businesses where I am absolutely willing to stick with a vendor who might be as expensive or a little more expensive, because they solve all the other problems that are going to get in the way
Absolutely.
and make it more expensive and more painful for me to get there.
Right.
If the Dollar Shave Club example, just to give you a little thumbnail, Michael Dubin, the guy who started Dollar Shave Club, realized, much like we all did at the time, around the 2010s, that buying razor blades, which are functionally commodities, as you described it, was
Sure.
ridiculously painful at retail. In fact, because I worked at Target at the time, I can tell you, I actually knew the buyer who was buying razor blades. They had a really good relationship with Gillette, as you might imagine.
Right.
There were only two things that Target locked up in the store at the time: iPhones and razor blades.
Razor
Now,
blades. Right.
you telling me that a commodity's got to be locked up? That's when you know your prices are just cuckoo bananas. When people are like, can't pay this, just got to steal it. Like
Yeah.
it's just so
That's right.
painful. So he saw it, but at the time, it was really unusual to have a relationship with a manufacturer that was direct to consumer through an internet style engagement, right? But
Right.
Michael Dubin said, you know what? We can ship these commodities to you using this thing called the internet, and in a simple subscription model that gets us the margin we need at volume. And so instead, we're just going to ship it right to you. So we're going to take a commodity, we're going to flip it on its head in terms of how you get to it, and then we're going to make it a great experience getting it every month. Take the weight off you of remembering to buy your razors, and
Sure.
worry about spending $20 on two of them,
Right.
and instead give you something that really makes a difference. And boy, did that work. Michael Dubin sold Dollar Shave Club for $1 billion to Unilever.
Yep.
And he literally sold a company that's selling some of the oldest tech in the world.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
Really.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
That's a great story. I mean, because like you said, it's, what are you doing different? Just the fact that people, understanding the problem, people going to the store, those things are locked up behind a glass case. You got to go look for the person. It's a real hassle. So,
Yeah.
that's innovative. So there's ways in any market, whether you think you're in a commodity market or what have you, to, create a segment or create a niche area. And that's just one example. Now everybody now, they've got a bunch of also razor companies now that have followed suit with the whole Dollar General model. But he was the first. So all you have to be is the first person to identify that.
That's right.
Um,
That's right.
so man, it's great having you on. I'd love to have you back on sometime, because there's some elements to this that I'd love to get into, but I want our listeners to know, obviously, Brandon, where they can find more. I'm going to bring up your obviously your website.
Thank you.
Of course, it doesn't have the website on here. Let me see. I believe that's the valuepromatrix.com.
Yeah, so valuepropmatrix.com.
Value Prop. Yeah.
You can find the book on Amazon. And if you look me up, BrandonCornuke.com, you'll also find me there. So any number of ways to connect with me or find out more about the book and the work I do. Happy to hear from anyone who has questions.
Fantastic. And the book, again, the Value Proposition Matrix, an innovator's guide to 4 questions that separate success from failure. Fantastic read. I recommend it. And we'll be posting a link on our show page, Brandon. Thanks so much for spending some time with me today.
Thanks for having me.
Yep.